Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Icarus and today is Sex Ed Friday. We're going to be a little bit different today because I wanted to talk generally about sexual identity and how it can be fluid throughout time. This is primarily in response to my own continued questioning about my asexuality. I have been debating over the past month or so if I've started experiencing sexual attraction. And just yesterday, I was watching Spider Man No Way Home. Feel free to cancel me for enjoying very bland superhero movies, but I digress. I was finding myself extremely holy shit. I love looking at Doc Ock. This DILF could fuck me and I would be happy with it. um and I'm like, is this sexual attraction? And I asked my friend Sam, and he was like, that does not have ace energy to me. I'm like, no, it does not. It has very horny vibes, and I'm still dealing with it, trying to figure it out. But I decided to look into different measurements of sexual identity beyond the Kinsey scale, and I kind of went down a little rabbit hole. So I wanted to talk about it a bit. So, there are some very popular stereotypes, and before I get into anything else, I want to talk about the different sexual identities and the stereotypes that can come with changing your identity. Starting with, you have homosexuality, which is the attraction to the person who is the same sex or gender as you. Heterosexuality is the attraction to the opposite sex or gender of you. So if you're a dude, you're into girls. If you're a girl, you're into dudes. That sort of thing. And some of those stereotypes around these, they're fairly common. In queer communities especially, heterosexual people are made fun of a lot because they're the oppressive class, that their sexuality is considered the norm. They have been able to hurt queer people a lot over time. But it's kind of damaging to heterosexual trans people because there's always these jokes about how hets don't fit into the queer community, but we do have heterosexual people that do fit into the queer community. Duh. Homosexual people, just look at old Disney movies. I mean, look even at current Disney movies as an example. There is a lot of queer coding that is used to make them be villains, which is great for the queer community because we get some pretty awesome villain characters to ascribe our sexualities onto. But in the same sort of tone, we don't get to see ourselves as the hero. That's annoying. That's where fan fiction comes in. But we're not talking about fan fiction or Star Kids Twisted, which was just fantastic. I want to watch it again. In addition to these two extremes, you have other things like bisexuality or pansexuality. I'm putting these two together because they are very similar, and some people like me may flip between the two labels. Well, biromantic, panromantic for me, but bisexuality is generally considered the attraction to two or more genders, and pansexuality is considered an attraction despite one's gender identity. The most common old phrase I heard is hearts, not parts, that sort of deal, which is a bit outdated, but that was something that was being thrown around when I first saw pansexuality really being tossed around in like 2013, 2014. But the two or more genders for bi, regardless of gender for pan, that's the easiest way I've seen. And like I said, there's a lot of overlap. What label you pick, if you are bi or pan, is more up to personal preference. I tend to lean towards the bi label because I like the history that I've seen behind bisexuality and biromantic and that sort of deal, but it's up to the individual. You also have asexuality, which is a lack of sexual attraction, and that has its own spectrum because you can have a complete lack of sexual attraction, don't give a fuck about fucking, that sort of deal, Or you can have people who experience sexual attraction in limited context. You could have people who experience sexual attraction, but then they lose it when they start getting into the deed. Or you can have people who don't experience sexual attraction but still want to experience sexual relationships, etc., etc. It is its own rabbit hole. One day I may make a video that's exclusively on the different labels of asexuality, from the most well known ones to the extremely specific. And from there, you have anywhere in between. We've heard of heteroflexible, we've heard of m-spec identities where there's multi-spec attraction. This deals a lot with like bi, pan, omni. Or you can have m-spec lesbians or m-spec gays, where that can come into a split attraction model, where the split attraction model is pulling apart sexuality from, or sexual attraction from romantic attraction. So you may have someone who is a lesbian romantically only, but may experience sexual attraction to another gender as well. Or you can have someone who is multi-gender, and when they are more femme, they are lesbian, but when they're more masculine, they may be something else entirely. And m-spec lesbianism, we've gone into it before in a different video where we talked about how it is a historic, it is rooted in lesbian history, and the whole pushback against it lately is rooted in second wave feminism, in radical feminism, and trying to create these tiny boxes that no one person can put you in, and it can be extremely hard to put yourself in a box too. That's why micro labels have gotten so popular since the advent of the internet, because it gives people a term they can identify with and toss out into the world and find the handful of people that agree with it. Like, even if you have 0.00001% of the world who relate to it, that's still a significant chunk of people when you think that there's like 7 billion people on this planet. It's why when I look at the, oh, trans people only make like 0.01% of the world's population. Well, that's still a lot of people. It's a lot of people. So let's talk a little bit about the different scales that you can use to talk about sexual attraction, in terms of like on a scale between homosexual and heterosexual, for example. The most popular and well-known one is the Kinsey Scale. And we've actually talked about Kinsey Wednesday during the whole Whipping Girl review, because we were talking about the guy that WPATH was originally named after and his experience with a trans woman. And he ended up going to talk to Kinsey about this before deciding that it would be a good idea to put her on hormones. And then from there, they started coming up with a standard of care sort of deal. And Kinsey had helped to make a sort of trans scale of like, how trans are you? Well, the Kinsey scale kind of works the same way. It goes from 0 to 6, from like you're exclusively attracted to the opposite sex to you are exclusively attracted to the same sex, and everywhere in between, with like the middle being the perfect, you are the perfect bi sort of deal. You are equally attracted to men and women, or any gender identity, because Kinsey was coming at it in a time where you were mostly trans or cis, but male or female were the most well-known gender identities. The non-binary, they were there in the past. I'm not saying non-binary identities did not exist back then, but they were not as well documented or as well researched or really included into scientific research at the time period. So where would asexuality go on the Kinsey scale? Well, they're X. And I have seen some asexual people try to create an ace Kinsey scale, from total asexual to total allosexual. But I feel like it misses a lot of the variation in how sexual attraction can be expressed in certain ways. Like I mentioned earlier, how you might experience sexual attraction until it comes time to do the deed, and you lose the sexual attraction, or you lose the desire to fuck. That sort of deal. So there's been a couple of other scales that have been made, like the Klein grid. It looks at a person's past, present, and ideal experiences. It tries to include measures of romantic, sexual, and social attractions. And it also makes room for one's personal sexual identity, which the Kinsey scale does not really do. The Kinsey scale is just a line, and this is more of a grid. Then you go from the Klein grid to the multidimensional scale of sexuality. And this actually breaks sexuality into 9 broader categories. It was developed primarily as a criticism of the other tools that don't distinguish sexual identity from behavior or treat sexual orientation as something that remains consistent across a person's lifetime. So I actually am going to be linking a Klein grid in a multidimensional scale of sexuality quiz in my links. So if you want to check them out, go ahead. And now I want to get to the part where I mentioned this is supposed to be talking about sexual fluidity and my own process with it. So you may not necessarily experience your sexual identity the same your entire life, but that's never made you a liar. That's a really important thing. Just because you identified as heterosexual at one point in time, and then homosexual, and then you go back to heterosexual, or you go to asexual, or you go to another identity, your sexual identity at the time was not invalid. What may have happened is you could have changed ideologically, where maybe you grew up in a church and you did not recognize your sexual attraction to the same sex. You had it possibly, but you didn't recognize it, or you didn't act on it. You may have been conscious of it, you may not have. And then when you left the church and you started going to leftism, you may have then gone into a full sort of rebellion against your past self and indulged in those homosexual feelings of attraction that you hadn't been aware of in the past. And depending on how far you go into leftism and into feminism, you may even end up going into radfem, where lesbian separatism is a thing. And then sometimes people, because lesbian separatism has such a leaning on gold star lesbianism and such a hatred of men, and will make fun of and push out bi women or lesbians who have had sexual relationships with men, because that can happen. You often find women who've had sexual relationships with men being de-radicalized from radfem circles and either embracing a bi identity or continuing to identify as lesbians but having the lesbian identity. You'll also have, and this is something I noticed most recently, but I'm not saying this is new, lesbians who are sexually and romantically attracted to women and also have sexual relationships with men. It doesn't make them less of a lesbian. It's just there's a man there, they decided to fuck him. This isn't a porn thing, this is a real life thing. And porn probably got carried away with it. Or you could be someone, like my personal experience is I didn't experience sexual attraction at all. And then at 19, I discovered the asexual label. So I started identifying as asexual because at that point, I had been in the church from like 0 to 18. I had romantic attraction to people of the same gender, or my perceived gender at the time, but I did not act on it because I was supposed to be a good Christian. I didn't really date a lot either. Then at 19, I discovered the ACE label, and I start disconnecting from the church and changing my politics and changing my ideology. And I was very happy with that label. And then in like 2016, I started learning more about sex because I decided I didn't like being so afraid of it. I wanted to learn more about it, and that sort of ended my sexual repulsion as I got more and more curious about it. And then I started testosterone in 2019, and that kicked off my libido. And I think since then, I've started experiencing sexual attraction in limited ways, mostly geared towards masculine or masked people exhibiting femme features, or femme people having an extremely huge self confidence, that sort of thing, as well as monster fucking. Let's not beat around the bush. I am a monster fucker till the day I die. I have feelings for Doc Ock from Spider Man No Way Home. That man is a DILF who could rail me, and not many people are allowed to rail me, even hypothetically. hypothetically. But that's another way it can change. And I'm not lesser because I am realizing I may not be as asexual as I thought, or I may be an m-spec ace, where I am saying that I am asexual, but I'm also sexually attracted to confidence, possibly. I'm going to say confidence. I'm sexually attracted to people with a whole lot of confidence in their own presentation because Lord knows. Okay, we're going to get off of that. Let's actually talk about m-spec for a bit. Like I said, we've discussed it a little bit in the past about m-spec lesbianism, but this is something that is really important to understand, that m-spec can be for a person who feels a single gender, or it can be for a person who has multiple genders, that changes, that fluxes, and their sexual identity may change with that. And that is just as valid as the subtly shifting or the being able to remain constant, that sort of thing. And I kind of want to end it on this note of, I have seen people talk about in the past how it seems wrong for gay men in history to have remained closeted and married women and had children with women, and moving that even forward into today's times. I saw this on an Am I the Asshole post because this gay man who knew he was gay married a straight woman and had a child with her before coming out at last, and they divorced, and people were calling him an asshole for quote unquote using her to have a child. And I feel like that dismisses the fact that this man, when he was talking about his ex-wife, was clearly in love with her and had been in love with her. And that just goes into how society treats sexual identities and sexual fluidity. Like, this man was in love with his wife. He just wasn't as sexually attracted to her as enough to stay with her throughout their life. And there's a lot that you can unpack here, from the idea that you have to be monogamous from wedding to death, or the fact that we are being so harsh on this guy because from the outside in you could argue that he used her, but from the inside out it's way more complicated. You have posts all the time of trans people who were in supposed opposite sex relationships or same sex relationships even come out, and there's been some really good stories, like Sam, when he came out and his now husband was like, cool, still like you. But then you have other people who their partners are like, please do not cut off your tits. Or hell, Orange is the New Black had a really good arc where Laverne Cox's brother actually played Cox's character pre-transition, and there was a heartbreaking scene where the wife would help her transitioning wife into dresses and trying to help her learn how to put on makeup, learn how to dress herself, all the good things that can come with having a supportive spouse or having a supportive friend who can help you through the more complicated stages of socially transitioning. And there was a heartbreaking moment where she said she really didn't want her wife to remove her genitalia. But because that genitalia was so dysphoric for her, she had to do it. And there's an entire arc of her character. She ended up stealing money to get her surgery, and that's why she's in jail, and she's very happy with her surgery. And there's a whole like sub arc about her wife starting to date a pastor, her son being resentful, all of that stuff. And it's so complicated. But that was my first real experience with seeing a trans person on the screen. And in Trans America, you kind of have something similar where the main character completely passed and was able to hide from her estranged son that she was his father. And then she came out as trans and all of that stuff, and it fell apart. It was a whole big thing, and it still had a pretty sweet ending because she got her surgery, and her son had gotten away from abusive family and that sort of thing, and they were reconnecting again on a different level, knowing each other's identities fully. And I don't know where I'm going with this. There's a lot of good. There's a lot where you can see people talk about how their partner or their spouse is the exception. And you get a lot of people deriding the idea of someone being their exception. But I think there's something beautiful in it. If it's not being used over their spouse's or partner's head, if it's something that is true, I think it's something wonderful to be able to dismantle the idea of rigid sexual identity and letting people fall in love romantically and sexually with someone they may never have fallen in love for in the past. I don't know. But that's just my opinion. And I rambled off a bit. I'm sorry. Today's been a day. So y'all just let me know what you think. I'm very curious. Have you experienced sexual identity flux? Did you notice that when you were a kid, you might have been attracted to a certain type of person, and then as you grew up, something changed? Or have you been the same your entire life? Because that's pretty cool too. Like seeing how people change as they're growing up, and yet something has remained stable in their life for all of that time. I don't know. It's just really cool. I want to learn more about it. So let me know. And if you like this sort of shit, feel free to subscribe because I'm going to be posting Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Otherwise, I guess I'll see you Monday. Have a great weekend. Stay hydrated, folks. Bye.